Okay, so we're just filling time here since some of you probably heard from Camilo last week if you've been coming to this class. And Opportunity's been in Colombia for like 50 years, its whole history. It started there. And they've got a whole new gig going right now with the program has changed a lot over the years since we went, Lynette, where it was strictly loans. Now it's like offering financial services to the poor, a whole range of financial services, so that they can, have a life, lift themselves out of poverty. And the organization continues to reach deeper and deeper into that poverty pyramid. Like, so now we're working with some individuals that they don't have a micro business funds. They're really at the bottom, and this program called graduation program is trying to get them just up to the level where, and it's very intensive, holistic wraparound services where they get visited weekly by social service person and an economic development person, and it's 18 months and training, and at the end of that they get some funds to start a small business. So we saw some of those women in that program. And that was extremely moving to me. Over the years, we've seen a lot of programs, but this one really is. It's really reaching down.
Driven by the women, just so you guys know, we're mostly in this class too. Except for you.
And what are some of the businesses that they would be starting? Like,
it's kind of early to tell because they're just starting in with the thing, but it will probably be making things in their home and selling them, either in the market or even from their home. So a lot of the poor in Bogota, unlike here, they live up in the top of the mountains because it's hard to get to. And so you can imagine if you have to come down the mountain to buy things, it takes you all day.
They squat.
Yeah.
They don't really have any land.
Yeah, so the people that we're working with in that program are squatting, and then eventually it turns to a town. Yeah.
Yes, could you speak a little bit? I mean, you've been involved with Opportunity International for years and years, and about the success. I mean, my understanding is that Opportunity loaned money to people to get started in business, but they were to pay it back. So it was a revolving thing that, the money did not just go away, it came back.
Yes.
So can you tell that there is any difference in the countries where they have been active all the time?
Yes. That's a really great question, because it used to be super simple to measure the success, because did they pay it back or not, and they did in 98% of cases. Is incredible. So that is still the case, but the money that's being lent now isn't necessarily coming from Opportunity. It's Opportunity is connecting many more people than we ever used to be able to actual banks in country. Who have a heart for the poor. So it's a little bit training the banks, and it's a little bit training the clients, and making a marriage so that they can go forward. And so, yes, the banks would not be lending to these people if they were not paying back. They're not,
So one
mission-minded in that sense.
One of the metrics was they for every $1 that's given, $10 goes out.
It's released. Yeah.
Wow.
So
And they just finished $100 million capital campaign called the Waymakers, which they want to be able to leverage that into $1 billion of services to the poor.
So to follow up with that a little bit, and I know very little about this, but I've heard that is financial services and seed money has been one of the problems of creating and keeping poverty in our city, in our ghetto.
right.
Has Opportunity International ever thought about doing that in the U.S.?
We get asked that a lot, and I'm not opposed to having somebody do a pilot program for whom, reaching people in our city, that's their heart. I think that there's other obstacles in the U.S. beyond just access to credit, because I feel like there are some programs out there, but the issue is, again, connecting people to those programs. They may not know about them, but I feel like we do have a social net that catches people before they get, not all, but catches people before they get down to that level of poverty. there's issues of mental health, of course, and, so I don't know. I think that strictly the financial services that Opportunity specializes in, I don't know if that would address all of the issues that we have here in this country. It'd be worth a try.
But it's never been their mission be.
No, it's never been, I'm sort of saying, Opportunity is probably not going to do it because the need worldwide as people that are living below $2 a day is kind of feels infinite. If we tackle that in our lifetime, maybe move up, because I don't know what would be the level of people in the US that are considered living at poverty level. It's way more than $2, I would imagine.
$2 every cup of coffee
Mm-hmm.
out of Starbucks.
I think 20, anybody with family income of less than 20-some thousand a year, I think.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Is that with 4 people?
I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the numbers very well.
Yeah. So the other like new efforts that probably Camilo talked about, because he's tasked with it in Colombia, is bringing financial sector to the agricultural sector and to education, to schools. And so schools is well underway. So they're financing small school basically it's women.
Homeschool, isn't it? It's like a homeschool.
It's like, it starts like a homeschool. It's people, like their kids, in order to go to the public school, would have to walk, a ridiculous distance down that mountain, not safe, and then they get there and the schools are not quality. So these moms basically, maybe some of them have some teaching background, maybe not, but they start these schools and for the kids in the community, because there's nothing else.
What Opportunity does is, in addition to the loans, they do that thing called Eduquality,
Right.
where they really help the teachers with the quality of what they're teaching. So they really.
So 2 different programs. One is funding these moms to start schools so that they can get out of their home, serve more kids, have an actual school. And then those loans would need to be repaid over a longer period of time than a small micro business where all you're doing is buying fabric and then selling it the next week, your product the next week. These would need a longer loan term to pay back. So there's that program. And then there's what Steve's talking about, which is they're getting together a lot of school proprietors from an area where they're sharing their best practices, their frustrations, they're helping each other. They're kind of like a trust group of teachers, of school administrators.
Well, it's online as well.
Yes.
Yeah, they do have a lot of training modules available on their phones. It's just amazing.
The
Everybody.
technology is really
Has a
kind of
phone.
great now.
Uh-huh.
The poor actually have access to the phone.
Mhm.
And so they're able to deliver a lot of the information and services
Mhm.
through digital platform.
Yep.
Like a farmer, they can pull up on their thing that, when's the right time to put the seed down and how much they have access to this incredible data. But I want you guys to know all about the women. All about, I really mean that, because the women are the ones that are like absolutely incredible when you go down there. They're doing like everything, just like you guys.
What do the guys do while the women do it?
The guys are out wasting the money, unfortunately.
No, there's
Don't even
no,
stay in.
that's not a generic statement. There's plenty of men that are, scraping it too.
Statistics again are high for,
But culturally, like in Colombia, they might have several families, they may have more than one family if they can afford it, so it's not, I don't know where all the men are. You go up into these areas and you don't see too many. Yeah, we didn't delve it too deeply into that. Mhm.
Well, thank you, Joan.
You're welcome. Anybody else have a ministry they want to talk about? I cede the floor.
Actually, you both can answer because I'd love to hear more about what does Colombia look like? Tell me about when I go to Colombia, I picture green.
It's a big country, so it depends which region.
So tell me what does the US look like?
Yeah, really big country. I didn't quite realize you gotta fly to get from one city to another.
I think it has like the industry is tourism. I think it's emeralds. It's,
Coffee.
you know, coffee
Mhm.
and other, you know, food. It's got gorgeous coastline. I mean, it's like going to Hawaii, you know, on the coastline.
Yeah.
And yet the Bogota is 8 to 9,000 feet up. So Bogota is a whole
Wow.
different climate.
You
It's
feel
like-
it too.
Like you're in
like
Colorado.
Yeah.
Even in the valley, you're like, you feel that altitude.
The people are beautiful looking. Like if you, they're, they just are beautiful people, how they dress and how they look. One of the little tidbits you'd like to hear is that it's a cultural thing to have really good teeth.
Oh, yeah, that was
So like
interesting.
everybody there, no matter how much money they have better looking teeth than I do.
No, it was just funny because somebody in our group noticed that and mentioned it. And then Brian, who was taking us around, who lives there, said, yeah, that's a cultural thing. Like you save money to get your teeth looking good. You know, people just
Ain't that
really
wild?
care for their teeth.
Yeah.
But it's true, if you look around, they all have these great smiles. And
So are people leaving Colombia? Like all these people are immigrating to the US? Are they just
You know, they're more going in because, Lois, they're right next to Venezuela. So they have
And
like,
Nicaragua, right?
and Nicaragua, they border actually Venezuela,
Nicaragua,
Brazil.
Nicaragua, and
So they are struggling with immigration themselves. So many people coming in to
Yeah, he
Colombia.
mentioned that. He said they have 2 million refugees last
Yeah,
year, last
it's
week, and it was unbelievable to think about
A
that.
lot of these groups that we're working with are
Our refugees.
primarily refugees, yeah.
Wow.
so the government is fairly stable there?
Well, you know, it's kind of like the whole South America right now is sort of shifted to the left. So it's not, you know, unstable, but you
No,
know,
it's
it
very
was
stable, but it just has a new leader that,
kind of a leftist leaning, so that he's actually one who is, you know, it doesn't change incredibly things like what Opportunity does. We talked to them and they said, you know, they kind of, there's advantages to both the right and the left. The left, they access a little bit more in the way of services. But it's just what it means in those countries is you have this extreme gap. So the biggest thing I always see from one of those trips, it's like going from, you know, Englewood or Austin in Chicago into River Forest Oak Park. You know, that change of so dramatic and down there you just go, you know, 30 minutes and you're from the poorest of the poor into super wealthy. So the gap is bigger than you see in our country.
When you say left, does that mean socialist or communist?
so.
Socialist.
Mhm.
Is there gangs, problems and?
You know, here's my impression growing up and as a young adult, I always thought like the drug stuff was in Colombia. I think it was
Yeah.
Medellin and
Yeah.
and Cartagena.
Yep.
I think that's still there, but it's not as visible and not as big as it was back then.
No, not at all. It used to be a very violent place. In fact, when we went through Bogota, there was a museum, and I wish we'd had the time to see the exhibit on the period of violence in Colombia, which was all drug related. That's over. You know, it's stable compared to other countries.
And they have what's it called, the FARC, I think, that is, you know, the rebels that were in kind of the rural areas. They're working on, they've been trying to kind of build rapport between them. So if there isn't the violence.
Hello, everybody. Forgive me. So,
Probably.
hello, everybody, James Warshay, Circle Urban Ministries. I feel like I owe you guys an explanation. Hey.
We managed to fill the time. We have a group that just came back from Colombia, in South America to talk with another one of our missions teams. So we managed to fill our time with a little impromptu discussion on
Well, I'm glad. Welcome.
but we're glad you're here.
I am glad to be here. I almost canceled. Yesterday, I was in Bloomington. I got a call in the morning that my nephew was found dead in his car. And the coroner ruled self-inflicted. No signs of that. So we were trying to figure out what happened. how could that happen? It's my wife, Dominique, who has been such a rock and a support. So we're trying to figure out what happened, how it happened, who's responsible. You know, the first thing you want to know is who did it. And so we learned it was self-inflicted, but there were no signs that pointed to him doing that. He's making plans for the future, etc. So
How old was
24.
What was
And it
his-
was right outside his girlfriend's house, Emmanuel.
Man, can we just pray right now?
Yes, wait, that would be helpful.
Father, there's times when we don't know what to say. But we pray for James and his wife Dominique and Emmanuel and his family,
Yes.
that you would give them comfort and peace and the strength that surpasses all understanding. We thank you that James and Dominique have come today amongst this tragedy. And we pray that this time would be glorifying and edifying to you and would give them some comfort and peace for the ministry they continue to lead, which is to try and impact people to know you. And we ask all these things in your son's name. Amen.
And thank you so much. And so the conversation that we're having today, the reason I said I gotta go is because it's ever more important, because we're talking about adverse childhood experiences, the things that shape the stories we tell ourselves and that our kids tell themselves, that sort of fuel how they attach to people or don't attach to people and how we show up. And so if you have your Bibles or your Bible apps, I ask that you turn to Genesis.
Pastor, can you be that?
Okay. And I'd love for this to be a discussion more than a lecture type. Are you all okay with that? So we're going to Genesis 1. We're not going far. And let me pull my Bible app up. And it's Genesis 1, I believe, 26. We'll start there. And we're going through verse 31.
You just want people to read?
I'll read, and then there's a verse I'd like for us to read together. So I'll start with verse 26. I'll start with 26, and then I'll ask that we read 27 together, and then I'll read 28 and 29. It says, and God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowls of the air, over the cattle and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. We can read together. So God made man in his own image. In the image of God created him, male and female created he them. And then God blessed them and said unto them, be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, fowls of the air, and over every living thing that creepeth, that moveth upon the earth. Let's just stop there for a second. If I had my slides up, you'd see me point to the word dominion. So when Jesus came to earth, you heard him talk a lot about the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God. The kingdom is likened unto this. The kingdom is likened unto that. The kingdom is likened unto this. And so as I've been studying Genesis, my wife will tell you, I've been in Genesis probably for the last 5 years. Just I can't get out of Genesis because so much has happened in Genesis that if we understood Genesis, some of the rest of the Bible would make sense. So he said, the kingdom. But if you look here, the word dominion is mentioned by him twice. Let us create man in our image and our likeness, and let them have dominion. So we call God the King of Kings, right? So we were given dominion by a king, which means if you take the aggregate of the word kingdom and take king here, it's kingdom, it's king and dominion. So if you give king dominion, you're given dominion by the king, kingdom. kingdom that we keep hearing so vividly about is the dominion given to us by the king. And so we've been told to seek first the kingdom. But when you ask somebody, what does that mean? The answers range. But what you're really being told to seek is the dominion given to you by the king. And so what dominion is that? See, there are 3 questions every last one of us is going to ask, or has already asked. And your children will ask it, your grandchildren will ask it, your friends. The 3 questions are, number 1, who am I? Number 2, why am I here? Number 3, where am I going? Now, there are 2 additional questions. What am I called to? What am I put here to do? And what gifts do I have to do them? But the 3 main ones, who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? Now, there are a few things that stop us from being able to answer that question. Before we go further, let me ask, have any of you ever asked that question? How many of you came up with answers? Or that's still a search for many of us. Who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? Now, can you imagine a child growing up in this world today trying to find the answers to that question with all of the things that are in front of them that are distracting them from even answering that question? So I study psychology, and Abraham Maslow is one of the people we study all the time. You've seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the pyramid, it says the first need is our physiological need. Now, you can't even get to the question unless your physiological needs are met, like water, food, shelter, my most basic needs. But then right above that is safety. And when we meet, when they're talking about safety, they're not referring to, do I feel safe in my home? Things that, when you're talking about safety, they're referring to things like, when I open the refrigerator, will there be something to eat in here for me? Is the month further than the means? Those are the types of things that we're talking about when it comes to safety. And then when you get to the top of the pyramid, you get to self-actualization, or the ability to live my best, to become my best self. One chart had it put in the terms of the ability to create, would send me back to Genesis, because the Creator created us in his image. And I often say in their image, because it said, let us create mankind in our image and our likeness, which means if you're created by a creator, you too must be a what?
Creator.
You too must be a creator. And so we often live our highest self. The highest form of self is when you have the ability or the peace to create. And so what we do at Circle is we try to give people the stability, the peace, the room to create, because we feel like that is when you are really at one with the creator who created you. Do you have space? Do you have room? Do you have the freedom? Do you have the peace to create? But there are things in our lives that really prevent us from doing that. And that's sort of what we're here to talk about today. Adverse childhood experiences, the things that we experience in our lives that shape the story we tell ourselves, that stop us from creating. How many of you walk into a room and this is me. How many of you walk into a room and you can point out all of the things that need to be fixed? And I'm not just talking about along the wall or anything. You can sense something wrong. You know where the problems are. Anybody? Some people are naming people like, I know people like that. So what that tends to tell you is this may be your area to create. Oftentimes, if you're the person who can see, because what you're seeing is the void. And just go back to Genesis. What did our God see? before he started creating. He said the earth was without form and void. And he filled it. And remember, you're in his image and in his likeness. So when you see void or without form, you may be created to create there. Does that make sense? But our kids are growing up in a society where there's no room to create, or there doesn't feel like room to create. And so there are things that happen in our youth that cause us to stop creating. There are 3 main categories: abuse, neglect, and I'm drawing a blank now on the third category. So I'll tell you the 3 main realms also that adverse childhood experiences take place. Number 1 is the household. Number 2 is the community. And then number 3 is society. Now you would think society and community they're not the same thing. So what we mean by a household is what's going on within the confines of your house. Is there emotional abuse in your house? And let's put a pin in emotional abuse, because we're going to come back to that, because that's the most common form of adverse childhood experiences, but it's the least talked about.
Mm.
Then is there, when you're talking about your community, are schools underfunded? Is your community devoid of resources? Is your community a food desert? All of those things affect you as a human being, especially as a child, because it puts you in survival mode, and it causes you at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of need. It causes you to scramble there and stay there until you can figure that one out, and then you can move to level 2 and where's your safety. Most people don't even get to level 3 where we're dealing with belonging and intimacy, because they stay in survival mode. And so what we found is that they attach to people that help them survive at level 1. And they mistake attachment for intimacy and love. And then they procreate in that realm. And now children are dealing with that same scenario. If you go in the Bible, the story that best matches that is Jacob, Rachel, and Leah. If you remember Leah, she said, my husband doesn't love me, therefore let me give him a child. And when the child came, she said, I'm going to name this child Love, because now my husband loves me. Or I'm going to name this child, she gave him different names, but I'll name this child and that because my husband now looks upon me. And so the children grew up feeling like, they don't see me, they see a solution to one of their problems. And then those same children took it out on the brother that they did see as the one that was loved. And this happens all of the time in all communities. It is highlighted more in impoverished communities, but it happens everywhere. Now, the question I have is, what do you think is the most talked about adverse childhood experience? The experience that really sends a child from peace, stability to chaos. Neglect. Physical. Okay. If you could pick one event in a child's life, there it is. Divorce. I want to stop there for a second and highlight that, because we have become desensitized to what it does to children. We think they'll survive. I survived it. They'll survive it. And the truth of the matter is, it sends children. It's liken it unto creating a world, right? And just blowing the world up and then telling the child to pick up the pieces. Now, trust me, I don't look down on anybody who's got a divorce. Let me share my story. My ex-wife and I divorced, 3 children, and the children lived with me. And so I watched firsthand what it did to them. My 2 sons became completely different humans. Completely different humans. And I thank God for my current wife, because not only for the love we share, but she came into the family and provided a feminine energy and a peace that reopened my children to being who they are. And my kids never wanted to call anybody their stepmom, ever. But I'll never forget my son wrote her a letter saying, if I ever had to call anybody stepmom, thank God it's you. And my youngest son now talks. He really didn't say much for like 4 years, like at all. And so these are the types of things that happen that kids don't talk about, but they cope with. So divorce is the number one thing that's on the average childhood experience. But the second thing that no one talks about is emotional abuse. Now, what does emotional abuse look like?
Neglect.
That's one.
Criticism.
Bingo. And why criticism? What does criticism do to a person? Because that is a great answer.
It diminishes you.
It diminishes you. What else?
It hurts your confidence.
It's to some, it destroys your confidence. Especially, it turns you inward. Especially when the criticism is coming from someone who is put here to protect you and help you build who you are. I was sitting in a course about adverse childhood experiences, and the lady said, your first abuser is always your parent. What? So yeah, because they say things to you that they think is helping you, but it's really harming who you are. And let me say this, boys handle emotional abuse very differently than girls handle emotional abuse. Young boys turn inward and some never come back out. Wives, how many married women here? Everybody here, okay. Have you ever had a disagreement with your husband and it looked like it took him a week to just get over it? Husband said, no, nah. It's just to get over it, or for us to even have a conversation about it. Or did the husband go inward and then just decide to come out as though nothing ever happened? You know what happened? Let me just tell you what happens when we do that. We have internalized the pain, but we've been taught that we shouldn't feel this pain. And so we spend this time talking ourselves out of how we really feel. And then we come out and pretend like we never felt that way. And what it does is that it becomes a coping mechanism, but we never addressed how we feel. And so what ends up happening when you do that is you lay something here and you watch the next person trip over it, or the way we say it is trigger it. And then we respond just a little bit more intensely the next time because we never actually dealt with it. Anybody experience that? Now, how do we help children? I see a smile. How do we help children deal with that? Especially when you're a young boy and you're told, don't feel anything. Don't feel, don't say, you're a man. Be tough. Any guys ever heard that? Be tough. It's actually more tough to say what you feel than it is to not say anything. How do we help children? How do we help our children and our families deal with that? Because many families are being torn apart because we don't have the tools to communicate with one another when things are tough. This situation with my nephew exposed pains in our family that we were all running from. And I'm supposed to be the one trained in this. And I too have been quiet on a bunch of subjects. And I figured, okay, my excuse that I gave myself is this person will never be able to hear what I'm saying. You ever give that excuse? They'll never listen. You see how I turned it that way? I don't have the tools to say how I really feel, but they'll never hear me. And then when you actually say something and they hear you, well, that's just this time. So let's deal with a couple tools to communicate. And then we'll go back to a few more adverse childhood experiences. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So number one, and this is hard but we have to get to a place of self-actualization where we know how we feel and we're okay with feeling that way. So if no one's ever told you this, let me share this. How you feel, no matter what, is okay. You were created with those feelings. It is okay. Give yourself permission to feel. But as parents and grandparents, then also give your children permission to feel. Okay? Number two, it's okay to communicate how you feel in I statements, not you statements. I'll give an example. Let's just say my wife, Dominique, has done something, I don't know. Let's just say she's done something that irritated me.
But that would never really happen.
That would never really happen. Right. That would never happen. It is you go in attack mode or offense when you say things like, you irritated me when you did. How often do we communicate that way? The person has no other alternative but to defend themselves. There's no choice. Wait a minute. And how often do we now? So one of the most misused words in our society of late is the term gaslighting. And so we'll think if she responds with, "Nuh-uh, because that's not what I said. What I said was," we would take that to mean she's gaslighting. When the truth of the matter is what she's really saying is that's not what I meant. The way to approach that would be, I felt this way after our communication. Now we can address the real issue, how you felt. Then you give the person the opportunity to say, you know what? I did not intend for you. That is not how I intended for that to come off. I didn't want you to feel that way. But it comes from the premise that the person in your life is there for good reasons. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? How else might one communicate when they felt offended? Any thoughts? What did you say?
I said not say anything. So it's like being quiet.
Oh my, and then it just grows and festers. And then we eventually say something.
Or walk away.
Or walk away. And I'll say this. Whatever response you give becomes easier to give the next time. Now let's apply that to walking away. The more you walk away, the easier it becomes to walk away. And here's the part they don't tell us about walking away, the further you walk each time. Because what a person ends up training you to do is protect is as I walk away, I'm teaching myself how to live without the other person, and I'm teaching the other person how to live without me. And so as we walk, we continue to walk a little bit further because you feel like you need another layer or barrier to protect yourself. And all adverse childhood experiences force us to do is protect ourselves because the people who we feel like we're put in our lives didn't do so. And so you have grown people in protection mode that have never come out. Which also means that they struggle to create, to become their highest form of self. And we find this prevalent the most in communities that are underserved, underprivileged. But we are not absent of finding this in every community. You know what I mean? And so one of the things I don't do, and anybody who has ever funded Circle Urban Ministries or any project that I'm attached to, they will tell you, I don't sell poor kids to you. You know how some organizations do this for 5 cents a day, you can feed my starving child. I don't sell poor children to you. What I do is I share that if given the opportunity to live in a healthy environment, this child or this family could thrive. And I say could because the ultimate decision to thrive will be theirs. But at least I've done my God-given responsibility and laid a foundation where you have the opportunity to thrive. It is now your choice. And so what we do is we help people help themselves. But we will not enable you to not help yourself. And you find that there is pride in the people that we're serving and we're helping because they know that they have the ability. We're just giving you what you need to help yourself. I worked in the food pantry. So Circle Urban Ministries had the food pantry. A couple weeks ago, we were short-staffed and they were like, all hands on deck. So all of the staff, senior managers, everybody came down and we were all working in the food pantry. And I don't know if you guys heard about the explosion that took place in Austin. So Circle became a shelter because that's what people needed. But we're not going to stay a shelter. We'll give you a place to stay for a couple days while we work with you to find new housing. Because the building exploding was tragic, but you got to find new housing. And so everybody, we're pleased to report all of the families that came to Circle found new housing, right? Now, one of them came back to our food pantry that day. And I was watching and listening. He says, James, first of all, I want to thank you all for helping. And as we're going through, helping them say, okay, this might, for a family of 2, this might be helpful, nutritious to cook, things like that. But he was turning a lot of things down, and many people would just take as much as they could get. He said, no. I don't want to waste any food. I'm going to, let's give this to the next family. Let's make sure the next family has the food and the next family has food. And that's the pride that communities take when you are empowering them, not enabling them. And so I want to pause and throw my little 2-second commercial and thank you to First Pres because you stand shoulder to shoulder with us as we empower people. So too do you all empower them as well. And so thank you, Bill. Thank you to the missions committee, to the teams who help us do that. And you guys have been partnering with Circle Urban Ministries even far before I got to Circle Urban Ministries 7 years ago. And so thank you. You guys deserve a round of applause for that. So from my family to yours, thank you all. So any thoughts, questions about that before we move on? No. Okay, so as we talk about adverse childhood experiences and tools that we can use to communicate, before you can even get to the tools or get to the communication, the question we must ask ourselves is, when these things happen, what stories do we tell ourselves? What story would an emotionally abused child tell himself about himself or herself?
I'm not good enough.
Let's park there for a second. How many of us, and you don't have to raise your hand, just wink, deep down really feel that way today? Some winks. Like, I'm not good enough. And that's how we show up in our marriage, our jobs, as parents. Secretly, I'm not good enough. Or if you're like I was, you will externalize that and say, I can never do anything to please X person. Or this person is never satisfied. That's the reverse way of saying I'm not good enough. What other stories might an emotionally abused person or child say or tell themselves? What other stories?
My fault.
Yeah.
It's always my fault. Have you ever met the always apologizing person? Isn't that annoying? You're like, stop saying sorry. But what they're really doing, what they're really telling themselves is, it's always my fault. My parents left. My father left because it's my fault. If I had not been so rambunctious, my parent wouldn't have left. And the truth of the matter is, that's not true. But everybody when they experience something adverse, creates a story. And if that story is not corrected, they tell themselves that story over and over and over again until the story becomes their story. And here's what ends up happening in relationships. Whoever they get with becomes the face of that story. You could quite literally be the face of your partner's trauma. Have you ever worked with, and we won't talk about marriages, have you ever worked with someone who was triggered by something that you didn't even say or do? And you're like, where did you get that from? What you're experiencing is their trauma and their response to the trauma. And so what they've done is they've made you the face of their story. Because when you say, it's my fault, or let's go with, I'm not good enough, and you might tell them, hey, the next time when you leave the coffee maker, can you just wipe around it, make sure there's no coffee, and walk away? Simple, right? But that may not be what they heard. What they heard, what some people hear is, I'm never good enough. I always clean the coffee maker. And this one time that I left it unclean, they noticed it. They never notice when I do it. I must not be good enough. Believe it or not, that is how people rehearse their story. So we've got, I'm not good enough. It's always my fault. What are some other stories people tell themselves?
Unlovable.
I'm not lovable. Now, when a person who tells themselves I'm not lovable gets into a relationship, it appears as though they're clingy. You ever met any clingy people? Might we be the clingy people? That's the story. I'm not lovable. So I'm going to do these things that make me lovable. Kid, what a kid does, the kids that feel like they're not lovable, they're usually the class clowns. Because they're trying to get attention that says, I see you. You matter. You're lovable. What are some other stories we tell ourselves? Here's one. I don't matter. I was on the phone with my sister yesterday after this tragedy, and we were talking about our traumas. I'm like, okay, let's put everything out on the table. How do you feel? What do we feel about? And she says, sometimes the way my trauma shows up is I feel like I don't matter. My sister moved to Seattle, and I haven't come to visit her. She moved there like 4 years ago. I've never gone to visit her. And so in her mind, that means she doesn't matter. I'm like, well, that's not what I was trying to say. I was trying to say it might be a little expensive. But that's not what she heard. I don't matter. What are some other stories?
I'm stuck. I can't get out of here.
Now that one is the one where if they're telling themselves that too long, that's where the suicidal thoughts come in. I'm stuck. I can't get out of here. There's nothing different. That's the one. And that is the most dangerous one. Because I don't matter. I can convince you matter. Or you can rewrite an I don't matter story. I'm not lovable will cause you to cling. It won't cause you to go suicidal. But I'm stuck. In other words, life will not be any different than what it is right now. It's traumatizing. The Bible will actually call that torment. You're tormenting yourselves when you feel that way. And so my encouragement to each and every one of us, and how am I on time?
We've got till 10 or a little after.
Okay. My encouragement to everyone is to check in. If you don't hear any other word, learn the words check in. Check in with our loved ones. See how people are really feeling. Give people the space to say how they really feel, no judgment. One of the most judgmental group of people is in the church. Because we believe that if you just have faith or you just pray, all of your troubles go away. And so we communicate that message to people. And so it makes them feel like I'm having this trouble because I don't pray enough or I don't have enough faith. And do you know how tormentous that is? That is quadruple torment. Because now you feel like I'm not good. Now the story you tell yourself is I'm not good enough. And the Lord believes that too. You see what I mean? I don't matter to my parents and I must not matter to God. Because if I had more faith, if I had more of this, then he would see. And that is why youth of today are walking away from the church in droves. And so here are some things to help make them feel comfortable. Number one, listen with zero reply. That is hard to do as a parent. It is. And so I'll say this. The only reason I'm able to stand before you is because I'm living what I'm talking about now. We practice this in my home. I thank God I am the first person my kids go to talk to now, not the last. When they feel a certain way, they will come and tell me because they know there's going to be no judgment. And if they feel like I can't hear, they'll talk to Dominique. So here's what we say. Here's a practice this. Give everybody in your family one of these. Hey, if you ever need to talk, you can preface it by saying no questions asked. And then I know to just listen. To the men in this room, especially you, please employ this because we are the hardest to talk to. Because we're the one they most want to impress, especially our sons. So tell them, listen, if you ever need to talk, no questions asked. I will listen, no questions asked. If you ever need me to pick you up, no questions asked. I will be there, no questions asked. What you're really saying is, make me the first call, not the last. Amen? Mm-hmm. Then ask questions. Here is no, not after that. That's part 3, number 3. If they say no questions asked, don't ask questions. But if they give you permission to ask questions, here is the way you phrase a question. Help me understand. Okay? The way we usually phrase it is, why did you? Didn't you think? Or why didn't you think?
What were you thinking?
What were you thinking? Right? What you're really saying is you weren't thinking. And so we never start with that in our home. The where we start with is, help me understand. And really, no. Here's the kicker. Really want to understand. Help me understand what you were thinking when you said this. And make it safe. Because the hardest thing for us to learn, watch this, there's more than one right answer. No. There's more than one. Help me understand what you were thinking. And if I can understand, so here's the policy. If I can understand what you're thinking, I can support it. I can support your direction. If I can't understand what you're thinking, I may be stuck. And so I'm going to ask you to help me understand. And I'm trying to understand. Help me understand what you were thinking. Or help me see why this was the best course of action. And what that says is, I actually believe you could have been right. But most people in their homes feel like they're always wrong. Now, I'm not even going to look at husbands, but I'm just going to ask, have you ever been in a situation where you feel like you're always wrong? Or in other words, you're never right. So that is really hard because you start to question you. And remember the first 3 questions we ask ourselves. Who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? It becomes impossible to answer the question, who am I? When the people around you are trying to tell you who you should be. Now, what institution do you know that is always trying to tell you who you should be. I just asked, I didn't even say an institution. I just asked the question. Which is hard. It doesn't give you the space to discover who you are. We tell you who you should be. And what we're really saying is, I want you to be a different version of me. Now, that's okay if you're somebody I want to be like. But it is not okay if you're not. And that's one of the things I'm trying to help parents see. Like, look, are you someone your child wants to emulate? If not, you must give them the space to discover who they are. And many of them realize I am pushing my child in an area that they don't want to go. A little testimony time, and then I'll wrap up. I love basketball. But as you can see, I'm a little height challenged. Look, love basketball. And so when my youngest son said, Dad, I want to play basketball, it was like the stars opened and the heavens started singing. That next morning, we were up at 5 o'clock in the gym, learning how to dribble. Oh, it was on. But then I was crushed when his sophomore year of high school. Now, we moved to Bolingbrook. The Bolingbrook varsity coach is saying he's gonna be on varsity next year. You know, give him one more year in junior varsity, and we'll put him on varsity next year. We want him as our guard. And then junior year, he says, Dad, sophomore year. It took me a year to hear it. Sophomore year, he said, I don't know that I want to play basketball. It's like, okay, you know, I told him, this is what I told him. Everybody goes through that feeling. And it's when you feel that way that you persevere. Hearing it come out of my mouth now, it's sad. But that's what I told him. And what I really was telling him was, it's not okay to feel this way. And so he went ahead and played his sophomore year, but he wasn't himself. And you could see it. And the coaches were asking me, what's wrong? Well, he's working through some things. So his junior year, right before he tried out for the team junior year. But I neglected to mention, I was his AAU coach. So I was his traveling basketball coach. Tried out for the team junior year and made the team. And said to me again, Dad, I need a break. He was playing 8 games a year, every year since he was in 4th grade. Dad, I don't want to do this. I need a break. This time I could hear him because he was like serious. It's not like he wasn't serious the year before, but I could hear him. I didn't take my class and I could hear him now. Well, son, it's your decision. Let me ask you a question, son. Are you playing basketball because you feel like I want you to play basketball? He's like, yes. Oh, I really don't care if you play basketball or not. At this point, that's what I finally convinced myself. I don't really care if you play basketball or not. I just want you to do what you believe is your path. So he said, okay, God, yes. So he took a year off basketball. He told the coach, I'm not playing this year. I'll help the team if you need me, but I won't play. I don't want to play. Coaches called me up. Listen, this is his decision. And then midway through the season, he decided, I've got that itch again. I want to play ball next year. And so he went back and played. But the reason I share this with you all is because I was living vicariously through him, because I was not half as, you will never hear me admit this again. So close your ears. I was not half as good of a basketball player as he was. And so when I saw how good he was, it was like that was me out there playing ball. How many of us do that to our kids? To their detriment. African parents do it all the time. You are going to be a doctor or engineer. That's what they tell us. And it's like, well, I don't know anything about engineering, and you don't want me touching anybody. So we're gonna have to pick something else. So I hope, you know, Usually, this is a long period that we talk about adverse childhood experiences. What I wanted to do is just touch on some highlights and give people some things to start thinking about as you go home and interact with family, friends, coworkers, husband, wives. And so I hope that you had one thing that you can take away as we start to communicate with our families and give people the space and the freedom to be who they really are, but also give ourselves the space and the freedom to be who we really are and feel how we really feel. Because it is when that happens that your highest form of self or the highest form of who God created you to be shines. And that's when you can give the real Jesus to the world. Your variation of the real Jesus to the world. And if each one of us gives that version, because none of us can be total Jesus, but if each one of us gives our version of the real authentic Jesus to the world, then the world will see him in totality. Amen?
Amen.
These tools are very useful. This has been a terrific session. I'm wondering if you share how you communicate these tools to the people you're ministering to.
So I can't do it individually, one-on-one, so I've trained our team. So our team is communicating on a daily basis with we call trauma informed care. So we're communicating on a daily basis, understanding what trauma looks like. So the first thing our team has to know is what trauma looks like, how people display their trauma, and then how they cope once they've identified their trauma. And then we start giving people the space. We start using terms like it's different kind of terms. Instead of little Billy, sit down. It's, hey, little Billy, it's time to take our seats. In 10 seconds, we'll all be asked to sit. And so we give people time to transition instead of an abrupt transition. Though, because abrupt transitions is trauma. That's traumatic. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I needed to talk to my kids. She sent out a text. In 10 minutes, we're going to need to talk. I wanted to tell them what happened to their cousin. Instead of, everybody upstairs now. Because that's traumatic. You see what I mean? And so it's small interactions like that all of the staff know, that you can begin to permeate the entire campus that way. That's how we communicate. Does that help?
Just before you go, because I know your time's short, how can we be praying for Circle and for your ministry?
Pray for our safety. Pray for continued wisdom. Pray for peace in Austin. It's just so much happening. Pray for peace in Austin. Pray for exponential resources. And pray for all of the leadership that we stay mission focused. And if we start there, I think we will feel those prayers. That's a great question. Anything else? Thank you, guys. Thank you. And I apologize.